Chapter 25. The Circle Closes. The morning sun filtered softly through the enchanted windows of number 12 Grimmauld Place, or rather, what remained of it after Sirius, with enthusiastic help from Uncle Vernon, had transformed the place into a hybrid magical muggle safe house. The wards were strong, the security stronger. But none of it compared to what today would bring. Today was Pettigrew's trial. Harry stood in front of the mirror in his guest room, no longer a dusty relic of black family scorn, but a space now decorated with Dudley's schematics, Aunt Petunia's framed lily photographs, and a Gryffindor banner that Hermione had insisted he hang. His black dress robes were perfectly pressed. He looked official, older. "Ready, son?" came Sirius's voice from the hall. Harry turned. Sirius had also cleaned up remarkably well. He wore formal wizarding robes, deep navy with subtle silver threading. His hair was tied back and a new wand holster sat on his forearm. He looked like the man he might have been if 12 years hadn't been stolen from him. "Let's do this," Harry said. The Ministry of Magic had never seen such a public trial. The Wisengamot chamber was packed. Journalists scribbled with enchanted quills. Auras lined the walls, alert and unsmiling. Pettigrew sat bound in a reinforced magical cage at the center of the courtroom, twitching, pale, his hands trembling as the magical shackles glowed faintly red against his skin. Harry sat between Sirius and Remus, with Professor McGonagall and Minister Fudge behind them. The Dursleys were watching from a secure balcony, Petunia wearing a somber black suit, Dudley with a pair of magical audio-visual goggles Hermione had enchanted for him to follow the proceedings. The prosecution presented first, cold, clear, devastating. Magical recordings of Pettigrew's Veritaserum confession. Testimonies from Sirius, Harry, Remus, and even Snape, though the latter had delivered his account with the sour expression of someone eating rotten lemons. The evidence was overwhelming. Pettigrew had betrayed the Potters, framed Sirius, lived as a rat, served Voldemort, but it was Harry's testimony that hushed the room. "I was told for most of my life that my parents died in a car crash," Harry said, voice steady. "Then I was told they were betrayed by Sirius Black, but none of that was true." He paused. "The truth is that Peter Pettigrew sold them out. He let Voldemort kill them. Then he let an innocent man suffer for it. For 12 years. Pettigrew whimpered, head bowed. Harry continued, "And while he hid as a rat, I built a life with a muggle family who never once stopped me from learning magic, who told me the truth matters, that justice matters, that fear can never be an excuse for betrayal." He looked directly at Pettigrew. "You had a choice, and you chose cowardice." The silence that followed was total. Chapter 26. A New Kind of Home. The early July sun shone warmly over the freshly trimmed lawn of number 4, Privet Drive. The neighborhood remained blissfully unaware that one of its houses now featured an interior charmed to be bigger on the inside, fortified with the latest magical wards, and, more controversially, home to a recently exonerated former Azkaban inmate. Sirius Black had officially moved in. It had been nearly 2 weeks since the trial. The press storm had mostly passed, thanks in part to a brilliantly worded joint statement from Harry, Sirius, and the Dursleys, prepared with help from Hermione and vetted by their newly retained legal counsel, Madame Greaves of Greaves, Penrose, and Thistle. But the real work was only just beginning. "Left elbow in, wand vertical, weight on your back foot," Sirius instructed as Harry adjusted his stance in the repurposed training room, formerly the Dursleys' guest bedroom, now lined with padded walls and charmed dummies that emitted loud criticisms when struck incorrectly. "Better," Sirius nodded as Harry executed the block deflect spell again. "But remember, your opponent doesn't wait politely for you to get ready." Dudley, sitting on the floor nearby, raised a hand. "What if we added a timed feedback circuit from the dummy to the defense matrix? I could wire a pressure sensor to trigger a randomized hex simulator." Sirius raised his eyebrows. "You're enjoying this far too much." "I'm just saying," Dudley replied with a grin. "Real threats don't give countdowns." Harry laughed, lowering his wand. "He's not wrong." After training, the trio joined the rest of the family in the kitchen. Aunt Petunia was slicing cucumber sandwiches, while Uncle Vernon reviewed investment prospectuses from Gringotts and Barclays side by side. "We've got the first round of magical muggle hybrid portfolio analysis coming in tomorrow," Vernon informed Sirius, who was still toweling off from training. "And your vaults are finally untangled from those blasted ministry freezes." "Good," Sirius said, reaching for a sandwich, "because I've decided to fund Dudley's summer integration lab." Dudley looked up in surprise. "Wait, seriously? You're trying to bridge magical and non-magical systems in real, practical ways? That's what the future needs. If I had half your curiosity when I was your age, I might have invented something besides a dozen uses for a flying motorbike." Petunia beamed. "That's very generous, Sirius." Uncle Vernon gave a grudging nod of approval. "Just make sure you treat it as a loan with proper documentation." Harry's heart swelled. There were still sharp differences between Sirius and the Dursleys. Vernon's insistence on regulation grated against Sirius's instinctive rebellion, but they had reached something resembling harmony. The walls between their worlds weren't just being lowered. They were being rebuilt as arches. That afternoon, they convened in the garden. Hermione and Ron had flued in through a temporary connection set up in the sitting room fireplace, and Remus Lupin joined them shortly after, escorted by an enchanted wheelchair pushed by a self-steering luggage trolley Dudley had enchanted to play nice with gravity. "What are we calling this?" Ron asked, eyeing the workshop blueprints laid out on the patio table. Harry exchanged a glance with Dudley, then with Sirius. "The Foundry," he said, "a place to forge something new." Hermione nodded approvingly. "It suits you, practical, symbolic, and a bit mysterious." Remus leaned over the table. "I've seen the architectural charms you're referencing. You'll need clearance from the Magical Infrastructure Office if this ever goes public." "We'll keep it private for now," Harry replied. "But eventually, I want people from both worlds learning from each other. No more fear, no more silos." That night, after the guests had left, Harry and Sirius stood on the back porch, watching the garden lights flicker with soft bioluminescent charms. "I think they really like you now," Harry said, glancing toward the kitchen where Petunia and Vernon were laughing over something Dudley had said. "I'm still getting used to being part of a family again," Sirius admitted. "I keep expecting it to be a dream, that I'll wake up in a cell." Harry put a hand on his godfather's arm. "It's not a dream, it's just different," Sirius smiled. "It's better." They stood in silence for a long moment, the peace of the evening wrapping around them like a protective charm. Then Sirius added, "Next week, the Foundry begins construction. After that, you and I start the next phase of training." Harry raised an eyebrow. "There's more." "There's always more," Sirius said with a grin. "Especially when you're planning to survive a world Voldemort helped shape." Harry nodded. He wasn't naive. There were still dangers out there, still enemies lurking in shadow, but for the first time in his life, he felt like he had everything he needed to face them: a home, a family, and a plan. Chapter 27, The Seventh Year Ends. There were no fireworks at Hogwarts that summer. No last-minute battles, no urgent owls streaking through the sky, just the quiet, weighty stillness of change as Harry Potter stepped out of his final exam, his robes smelling faintly of ink and lemon polish, and knew it was over. Not the war, not yet, but the waiting. The building. It was time. Fifth year had been the turning point. After Sirius was cleared and formally reinstated into the wizarding world, the Dursleys had helped coordinate a series of magical muggle conferences under the name Bridgework, discreetly partnering with Gringotts and several reform-minded ministry officials. Their work helped expose the inefficiencies of the Wisengamot and forced a re-evaluation of educational access in both worlds. That year, Harry had been pulled into meetings with the Minister for Magic, interviewed by the Quibbler and the Prophet, and more than once, sought out by witches and wizards twice his age for his opinion on integrating Muggle strategy into magical defense. But it hadn't changed the fact that Voldemort was back, and the real work had to be done in secret. The sixth year blurred with intensity. Under Dumbledore's private instruction, Harry had learned the theory of Horcruxes. Under Sirius's guidance, he'd learned how to dismantle them. And under Uncle Vernon's exacting standards, he'd developed the discipline to survive without relying on magical instinct alone. The trio, Harry, Hermione, and Ron, had traveled between terms to remote libraries, hidden tombs, and cursed ruins, dismantling what they later referred to in code as legacy architecture. Each time, they returned a little more hardened, a little more focused, but it was never just them. Dudley had grown into his role as a technomagical systems expert, developing enchanted tech interfaces that no wizard had even thought to consider. Hermione described him as a magical engineer with muggle logic, and by 7th year, even Flitwick was consulting him for research. Petunia coordinated quietly with Madame Bones, curating files from Muggle intelligence archives that helped track Death Eater movements. She never left Little Whinging, but her work reached the highest levels of both communities. And Vernon became the strategist behind the scenes. The man who once taught Harry to question appearances and track inconsistencies now coordinated intelligence reports with the precision of a military analyst. His Muggle-based security principles, surveillance redundancy, perimeter integrity, and behavioral pattern tracking had quietly reshaped how magical defenses were planned across 3 continents. He never cast a spell, but more than one aura swore his strategic briefings saved lives. By 7th year, the castle had become a stronghold. Dumbledore had expanded the Defense Study Group into a formal independent course, naming Harry and Hermione as its peer instructors. Their lessons weren't just spells and dueling techniques. They included situational response, magical ethics, and cross-world cooperation. Neville had blossomed into a confident leader, now Professor Sprout's unofficial apprentice and the school's unofficial resistance tactician. Luna, ever unpredictable, had predicted the fall of 3 Death Eater hideouts using a combination of divination and lunar planting cycles. Even Seamus had stopped scoffing, quietly absorbing everything Harry taught. Draco Malfoy, subdued after the failure of his father's public reputation and exposed correspondence with former Death Eaters, had taken to long walks alone. Harry didn't trust him, but he pitied him. They were no longer enemies, just survivors of different houses. That spring, McGonagall announced that for the first time in Hogwarts history, the head boy and girl had both been selected from students who were also active members of a resistance network. Hermione hadn't cried, but she had looked away from Harry very quickly, and now it was done. NEWTS had ended. Final reports were being drafted, trunks packed. Letters exchanged. The Hogwarts Express waited at the platform, steam curling against blue sky. Harry stood alone for a moment near the lake, the same place he'd first seen from the carriage window when he arrived at Hogwarts all those years ago, flanked by Aunt Petunia's calm confidence and Uncle Vernon's detailed itinerary in hand. He knelt down now, fingers brushing the grass, grounding himself. This place had shaped him, but it had never been his only home. "Ready," came a familiar voice. Sirius stood behind him, robes clean, wand holstered, a ring on his right hand that symbolized his seat on the newly restructured Wizengamot. "Almost," Harry said. "You've done more than anyone expected, and more than they'll ever understand." "Not alone," Harry replied, standing. Sirius smiled. "No, never alone." They walked together toward the train where Ron, Hermione, Neville, and Luna waited, along with Dudley, Vernon, and Petunia, standing beside an enchanted coach designed by Dudley himself. They were all there, the family that raised him, the friends who grew with him, the mentors who trusted him. And Harry Potter, 17 and ready, looked not at the train but toward the horizon. Not back, not down, forward. The confrontation hadn't come yet, but it would, and he would be ready. Chapter 28, Into the Hollow. They didn't know when he'd strike, only that he would. Over the last 3 months since graduation, there had been whispers, Death Eaters spotted near disused towns, magical interference on Muggle security systems, small communities vanishing without a trace. The Ministry tried to keep things quiet, but Harry's group saw through the silence. It was Voldemort, planning something, and finally he made his move. An encoded flu message, routed through half a dozen secure channels, reached Grimmauld Place at dawn. "The Hollow is compromised. He's calling you." Godric's Hollow, where it all began. I'm going, Harry said simply, as he and his team stood around the Dursleys' reinforced strategy table. The room was quiet, not from fear, but from readiness. Hermione was already loading her magically condensed case of emergency items. Ron had his wand strapped to one arm and a Muggle radio with an enchanted receiver in his pocket. Dudley stood with a portable detection rig slung over his shoulder. Aunt Petunia silently passed Harry a photograph of Lily, young, vibrant, alive. "I want you to come back with this," she said. "I want her to see what you've become." Uncle Vernon didn't speak. He simply handed Harry a folded paper with a map drawn in pen, an aerial view of the valley near Godric's Hollow. Every tree, building, and elevation point labeled. "You know what to do," he said. "Don't fight him where he's strongest. Change the terrain." Sirius clapped Harry on the shoulder, his face grim but proud. "No heroics, pup, just finish it." They apparated in under cloak cover. Harry, Hermione, Ron, Neville, Luna, Dudley, and Sirius, flanked by a small team of Order members, half of whom were using non-magical equipment charmed for stealth. Godric's Hollow was burning. Not physically, not yet, but the wards were broken. The air itself shimmered with unstable magic. Time slowed at the edge of the village, trees bending unnaturally, shadows moving without light. He was here. So was his army. They didn't storm the town. They crept in layered in illusions, shields, and misdirection. Harry moved like a ghost through the home where his parents had once lived. The ruins were different now. Voldemort had transformed them, walls rearranged, space twisted, memory fractured. And at the center of it all, standing where Harry's crib had once been, was Voldemort. His robes moved like smoke. His wand was already raised. "I knew you'd come," he said. His voice was quiet, too quiet. Harry stepped forward, not hiding. "I've been coming for years," he replied. Voldemort didn't waste time with speeches. He raised his wand, and the battle exploded. But it wasn't just between them. Outside the house, Death Eaters launched a coordinated strike, but were met by a coordinated resistance. Dudley's signal dampeners disrupted portkeys. Hermione's laid runes triggered shockwave counters. Neville directed groups through an enchanted headset Dudley had invented, and Luna danced through the chaos with uncanny precision, dropping traps and blessings alike. Inside, Harry fought, but not recklessly. Every move was calculated. Uncle Vernon's tactics, Sirius's dueling style, Hermione's theory, Dudley's unpredictability all fused into one fluid force. Voldemort was powerful, unbelievably so. But Harry was no longer just a boy with a wand. The room collapsed around them. Spells carved craters in walls, and time cracked at the edges of reality. Voldemort hurled curses that warped gravity. Harry answered with counters that fused both magic and raw momentum. His wand was only part of his weapon. His vision, his planning, his calm were just as dangerous, but Voldemort was growing impatient. "You think your little hybrid army can stop me?" he hissed. "You think love and bloodlines and borrowed tricks will protect you now?" "No," Harry said, and pulled out the final shard of the shattered diary. "The magic you use," he said, "is all built on fear, control, legacy." He held up the shard. "But legacy can be rewritten." Voldemort lunged, screaming. Harry didn't block. He redirected. The curse struck the shard, Horcrux-infused residue clashing with Voldemort's own fragment. The result was instant and devastating. A violent surge of backlash hit Voldemort like a tidal wave. For the first time he screamed, not in rage but in surprise. His magic turned on him. Harry raised his wand. Expelliarmus. It wasn't a killing curse. It didn't need to be. Voldemort's wand flew from his hand and shattered midair. The backlash consumed him. Magic torn from soul and then silence. Ash. Voldemort was gone. For good. Outside, the fighting stopped. One by one, the Death Eaters fell or fled. The hollow quieted. The sky, which had dimmed unnaturally for years, began to clear. Hermione ran to Harry. Ron followed, bloody but grinning. Dudley dropped his pack and hugged his cousin without hesitation. "You did it." Harry looked up. "No," he said, tired but certain. "We did." Chapter 29, The Morning After. The battle had ended before sunrise. The air still smelled faintly of scorched earth and ozone, but the silence in Godric's Hollow was no longer suffocating. It was clean, honest. The unnatural weight that had pressed on the village for nearly 2 decades had lifted, like a curse broken at the root. Harry stood in the remains of the Potter home, the morning light cutting through the broken rafters. Dust danced like golden snow in the sunlight. "Feels like it should be louder," Ron said softly beside him. "Like fireworks or, I don't know, music?" "It is loud," Hermione replied, "just not in the way we expect." They were quiet for a moment, listening. Owls, wind, a branch creaking in the distance. Life. They left the Hollow by midday. Clean-up teams from both the Ministry and the Muggle government, under Bridgeworks' joint jurisdiction, arrived within hours. Petunia coordinated evacuation logistics for civilians. Vernon worked with Shacklebolt on reconstruction priority zones. Luna catalogued every spell trace in the village with eerie focus. Neville stayed behind to help bury the dead. When they returned to Grimmauld Place, it was full. Not chaotic, not overwhelming, just full of people who had waited too long to say what needed to be said. McGonagall embraced Harry with a quiet fierceness. "Your parents would have been proud, Mr. Potter, not just because you survived, because you built something better." Andromeda Tonks brought her infant grandson to meet the boy who ended it. Harry corrected her, "The people who ended it." Even Draco Malfoy sent a message, short, tense. "My family owes its survival to the way you chose to fight. You didn't become him. I see that now." That evening, the Dursleys held a small dinner. No grand speeches, no magical fanfare, just a long table in their garden, food from both worlds, and people who had seen each other through every possible version of grief and triumph. Hermione recited a quote from a wizard's record, "Victory is not when evil is destroyed. It's when fear no longer controls the room." Dudley toasted Harry with pumpkin juice and said, "To the weirdest cousin on earth, who made us proud without ever needing to prove anything." Even Sirius smiled at that. Harry didn't say much. He just sat quietly, surrounded by people who had helped him become who he was. People who had seen him not as a chosen one, but as a son, a brother, a student, a friend. Later that night, Harry found himself in the upstairs hallway, looking at the mirror Petunia had hung near the front window. It still held the photograph of Lily. But now, beside it, was a new one. Harry, age 17, dirt on his face, exhaustion in his eyes, and a hint of peace in his smile. He hadn't just lived through it. He'd changed it. Sirius stepped beside him. "No speeches?" he asked. Harry shook his head. "Not tonight." Sirius looked at the photos, then the boy beside him. "You know, if James were here—" "I think he is," Harry said. "Not in some magical echo way, just in the choices we made." Sirius nodded. "Yeah, I think he'd like the garden." They stood in silence a moment longer. Then Harry turned away from the mirror, away from the past, and walked back toward the sound of laughter in the garden. Chapter 30. The Legacy. 2 weeks after Voldemort's fall, the world felt like it was learning how to breathe again. There were no parades, no fanfare, only rebuilding, quietly, fiercely. Ministry teams worked around the clock, peeling back the layers of darkness Voldemort's regime had buried into law, bureaucracy, and bloodlines. Hogwarts was already offering summer courses in civic magic and integration. Gringotts had launched a transparency program. Muggle technology experts were now openly working with enchanters, curse breakers, and security theorists to rebuild more safely than ever before. And Harry was waiting. "Do you want to join the Aura department?" Kingsley Shacklebolt stood at the edge of the Dursleys' garden with Harry, both watching as Hermione and Dudley debated spell-resistant materials over tea. Ron sat nearby, modifying a wireless transmission stone with Luna's help. Neville was sketching herb-based barrier designs with Petunia and Professor Sprout. "I don't know," Harry answered honestly. "I don't think the answer is just more fighters." Kingsley nodded. "Then what is it?" Harry took a moment. "I want to build something that outlives this moment, not just a better defense, a better way of thinking, a place where what I had, this blend of magic and logic, heart and knowledge, becomes normal, not strange." He looked at the house, where Sirius and Remus were inside talking with international liaisons. "I want more kids growing up like I did," Kingsley smiled. Then you don't belong in the Aura office, you belong in something new, and something new began. With the support of McGonagall, Flitwick, Shacklebolt, Petunia, and several Muggle and magical education experts, Harry announced the founding of the Foundry School, a magical institute independent of Hogwarts, focused on integrated magical and non-magical learning. Its mission: train the next generation of problem solvers, protectors, inventors, and bridge builders. The press went wild. Potter opens school for half-bloods and muggles, one paper screamed. What's he building? A threat or a future? Another speculated. But Harry didn't flinch, because the students were already signing up. Some were Muggle-born, some were squibs. Some had grown up in magical households but felt alienated by tradition. Some were just curious, and Harry welcomed them all. Ron became the Foundry's head of tactical response studies, part combat training, part quick-thinking development. He taught in boots and used chess metaphors for everything. Hermione, of course, ran curriculum development. She built bridges with existing magical institutions and advocated for full recognition of Foundry degrees within the ministry. Neville took a year off to study in Brazil, then returned to build the world's first magically enhanced greenhouse lab, right on Foundry grounds. Luna ran the meditation center, which students both feared and adored. And Dudley became the Foundry's first director of systems engineering, designing the security systems, network interface, and spell tech hybrid lab that soon attracted visiting professors from Tokyo, Nairobi, and New York. Even Vernon helped, quietly, from his home office, reviewing site assessments and advising on hiring protocols. 1 year to the day after Voldemort fell, the Foundry opened its doors. Harry stood at the gate as the first students arrived, some by broom, others by car. One girl arrived riding a mechanical griffin Dudley had enchanted for her. They looked nervous, eager, a little overwhelmed, just like he had once been. Sirius clapped a hand on Harry's back. You've created something real. Harry looked out at the students crossing the courtyard. No, he said, we did. Chapter 31, The Choice. It was well past midnight when Harry wandered through the quiet halls of the Foundry barefoot, wearing a hoodie Dudley had given him last Christmas. The school was asleep. The garden lights shimmered faintly through the windows. Spell-runed lanterns pulsed along the outer walkway. Even the magical surveillance systems had lowered into low-threat mode, Dudley's latest upgrade. But Harry wasn't patrolling. He was just walking. For the first time in his life, he had no mission, no spell to memorize, no dark force on the horizon. He had survived. He had built. And yet, he still hadn't answered the question everyone stopped asking after Voldemort fell. What do you want, Harry? He found himself in the Foundry greenhouse, where Neville had installed benches and glow-charmed ivy. The air was warm and smelled like basil and mint. Couldn't sleep. Hermione's voice drifted in as she stepped out of the shadows, a steaming mug in her hand. Not really, Harry said. She offered him the mug. Peppermint calming draft. He took a sip. You always know, Hermione smiled. Because I've seen that look before. You've saved the world, started a school, built a new magical future, and now you feel aimless. Harry chuckled weakly. I know it sounds stupid. It doesn't, she said. It sounds like peace, and you're not sure how to hold it. He nodded, staring at a small blue flower unfurling beside his boot. I don't know who I am without the next fight. You're the boy who was loved, Hermione said simply, and became a man who gave that love back. She stood. When you're ready for what's next, it'll find you. In the days that followed, Harry tried to live more slowly. He took long walks around the forest perimeter with Sirius. He helped Dudley test the Foundry's first flying drone broom hybrid, which promptly crashed. He read books that had nothing to do with combat or magical theory. He even wrote a letter to McGonagall, simply thanking her for believing in him before he believed in himself. But still, he felt a pull, not toward danger, not toward fame, just away. One afternoon, Petunia found him in the back garden, replanting a section of potion herbs that had outgrown their beds. You look like your mother when you do that, she said gently. Harry looked up. You think she'd be proud? Petunia knelt beside him. She'd be amazed. not just by what you've done, by who you've stayed. They planted in silence for a while, then she added, if you feel the call to step away, really step away, it's okay, you've earned it. Harry hesitated. What if stepping away makes me feel like I'm not doing enough? Petunia wiped the dirt from her hands. Then do what Lily did, live well, help quietly, and don't wait for a war to tell you who you are. 3 weeks later, Harry made his decision. He called together Ron, Hermione, Sirius, Dudley, and the Dursleys in the Foundry's main common room, now full of student projects and half-functional enchanted furniture. I'm leaving for a while, Harry said calmly. Leaving, Ron blinked. Like a holiday or like... Not running, not hiding, just going, he paused. There are places that need help rebuilding, not just magical villages. Muggle places too, ones Voldemort broke without spells. I want to listen, learn, serve quietly, be human for a bit. No one argued. Dudley just nodded and said, about time. Sirius raised his butterbeer. We'll keep the home fires burning. A week later, Harry slipped away at sunrise. No press, no fanfare, just a small travel pack, a charmed map, and a magically reinforced notebook for field observations. As he passed the gates of the Foundry, he paused to read the small plaque Hermione had insisted be carved there. This place exists because someone chose not to seek revenge, but to build instead. Harry smiled. Then he stepped into the road, not to run, but to go, to begin again. Chapter 32, Full Circle. It was 5 years later when he returned to the Hollow. He came alone, no bodyguards, no ceremony, just a man in simple robes with calloused hands and a satchel full of notes, herbs, and stories. He had been to nearly 24 countries, helped rebuild 3 schools, taught wandless defense to a village that had never seen a wand, delivered food, repaired wells, saved no worlds but changed lives. The kind of magic Voldemort never understood, the kind of life Lily and James would have chosen. Godric's Hollow had changed. The village was thriving again, shops open, children laughing, the wind no longer whispering warnings but songs. The ruins of the Potter house had been transformed into a garden. Petunia had overseen it personally. It wasn't flashy. No statues. Just lilies and roses, benches beneath leafy trees, and a plaque carved into stone that read, "Let love be the magic that lasts." In memory of James and Lily Potter, Harry walked the gravel path in silence, nodding politely to villagers who paused in recognition but did not interrupt. They knew. He wasn't there to be seen. He was there to remember. That evening, he returned to the Foundry. It had grown beyond recognition, now a full campus, with Muggle and magical departments, dual enrollment, open conferences, and the first intercontinental portal station in Britain. Ron was married to Padma Patil and had 3 kids, all equally chaotic. Hermione ran magical legal reforms from Geneva. Dudley was now a published technomancer and keynote speaker at international education summits. And Luna had left without a word and returned 3 years later with a magical creature no one could identify and a child she'd named Orion. The Dursleys had moved to a smaller house near the Welsh coast. Petunia still sent Harry weekly letters. Vernon had taken up beekeeping. Sirius was head of magical outreach now, half diplomat, half outlaw charm. Neville ran an entire branch of the Foundry focused on magical sustainability. The world was moving forward, so was Harry. That night he sat by the fire with his journal. His hand hovered over the next blank page. He had written hundreds over the years on grief, on learning, on healing, on the collision of 2 worlds that had once feared each other. But this page, it was for peace. He wrote, I thought survival was the end. But survival is only the start. Peace isn't quiet, it's work, it's daily, it's never just given, but it's possible, and it's worth it. The next morning, a first-year student spotted Harry walking the grounds. Nervous, she asked him a question she had rehearsed in the mirror. Professor Potter, what was the first spell you ever learned? Harry smiled. Not the first I was taught, he said. But the first I understood. He pulled a simple stick from the garden path and waved it, creating a small, glowing shield of light. Protego, the girl tilted her head. A shield, Harry nodded. It means I protect. She watched the light ripple in the air. Against what? Harry looked around, the school, the sky, the world, and smiled. Whatever comes next. This is the end of this fanfiction. For more stories, please like and subscribe.